They slept six to a bed and called body heat the furnace. They sealed their cabin walls with cow manure and burned dried buffalo dung because the nearest tree was 40 miles east. They brought the milk cow inside and slept against her flank for warmth. They twisted prairie hay into knots tight enough to catch fire and fed them into the stove every 3 minutes. All night, every night, with bleeding hands. That is how frontier families survived winter. Not with the roaring fireplace Hollywood gave them, not with golden light and warm cabins, with desperation, animal stink, and smoke so thick it burned the eyes. Of these 25 truths, which one killed more of them than all the others combined? It is not the one you think. Now, before we go any further, tap that subscribe button. What comes next only gets more shocking. We are not going to the movies for this. We are going to the people who were actually there. The letters Uriah Oblinger wrote home from Fillmore County, Nebraska, in the 1870s. The diary Miriam Davis Colt kept in Kansas Territory when her family was starving. Mollie Dorsey Sanford writing by firelight in Nebraska City. The journal of Percy Ebbutt, a young Englishman who homesteaded in Kansas and could not believe what winter did to the people around him. And the county death records that nobody reads anymore, but that tell a story the movies never wanted you to hear. The Homestead Act of 1862 sent families onto 160 acres of open prairie with no timber, no infrastructure, and no honest warning about what waited for them. Government land office pamphlets promised rich soil and mild seasons. The railroad companies advertised the great American desert as a garden paradise. They printed posters showing green fields and tall trees on land that had neither. Nobody mentioned the wind. Nobody mentioned that the nearest firewood might be a 2-day wagon ride. And nobody mentioned what would happen when November came and the fuel ran out. So let us start at the bottom, with the truths most people never think about, and work our way up to the one that changes everything. Number 25. The whole family slept in one bed. Body heat was not a supplement to the heating system. It was the heating system. Parents, children, sometimes a hired hand, or a stranger caught in a storm, all packed onto one straw-tick mattress under every quilt and blanket the household owned. Nebraska homesteaders wrote about this matter-of-factly. There was no romance in it, and there was no privacy. A mother, a father, 4 children, and a dog pressed together on a pallet 6 feet wide. The youngest children went in the middle because they lost heat the fastest. Today, roughly 90% of American homes have central heating controlled by a thermostat on the wall. 2 lifetimes ago, the furnace was your mother and your brother and the dog against your back, and that was everything there was. Number 24. They brought the livestock inside. Scandinavian settlers in Minnesota and Dakota Territory built combination houses with the family on one end and the cattle on the other, separated by a single shared wall. The animal's body heat raised the temperature inside the living space by several critical degrees. Some families had no partition at all. They slept beside their milk cow on the dirt floor with straw thrown over them both. The smell was powerful enough to make a visitor gag in the doorway. Flies in summer, ammonia in winter, and a permanent odor that soaked into clothing and hair and never washed out. But a single dairy cow generates roughly as much warmth as a small electric space heater running all night. On the northern plains in January, when the wind drove the temperature to 30 below zero, that cow was the most valuable thing the family owned. Not for the milk, not for the calf she would drop in spring, for the heat coming off her body while the children slept against her flank. Number 23. They sealed every crack in the walls with manure. Chinking a log cabin or a sod house for winter was a seasonal ritual, and the best sealant available on the open plains was cow dung mixed with mud and prairie grass. Women and children packed it into every gap between the logs with their bare hands. When the fire was lit and the cabin warmed, the manure softened, and the stench filled the room. When the temperature dropped and the wind picked up, the chinking froze, cracked apart, and the cold poured back through. So they did it again and again, week after week, all winter long. The women who did this work rarely wrote about it. It was beneath mention. It was just what you did to stay alive. Number 22. The open fireplace was a beautiful lie. This is the image Hollywood built its entire frontier around. The golden hearth, the dancing flames, the family gathered in warmth and safety. Benjamin Franklin identified the problem as early as 1744 when he published his pamphlet on the Pennsylvania fireplace. An open hearth sends roughly 90% of its heat straight up the chimney and out into the sky. It draws cold air in through every crack in the cabin to replace what it burns. A family could go through 5 full cords of wood in a single winter and still freeze on the far side of a one-room cabin. The side of your body facing the fire would blister. The side facing the wall was cold enough to see your breath. Every Western you have ever watched told you that fireplace was comfort. It was not. It was a desperate, wasteful, dangerous compromise, and the frontier knew it. Number 21. They slept fully dressed from November to March. No synthetic insulation existed. Wool was the best option if they could afford it. Animal hides if they could not. Flour sacks, old rags, everything they owned went on at once, including boots, hats, and gloves. Laura Ingalls Wilder described mornings in De Smet, South Dakota, during the long winter, when frost had formed on the quilts overnight and the bedding had frozen to the wall. The children did not undress for months at a time. Nobody undressed. There was nothing worth undressing for when you could see your breath above the pillow. Number 20. The chamber pot saved lives. That is not an exaggeration. Going outside at night during a plains blizzard meant disorientation within seconds and death within minutes. Settlers strung ropes from the cabin door to the privy and to the barn so they could follow the line back through the whiteout. Men who lost the rope died within steps of their own front door. One documented case from Dakota Territory describes a man found frozen solid 12 feet from his cabin. He had let go of the rope. The chamber pot under the bed was not a quaint curiosity. It was survival equipment as essential as the stove itself. We are only 5 entries in, and the picture already looks nothing like the movies. But we have not reached the real killers yet. Keep that question in mind. Number 19. The root cellar stood between a family and starvation. Dug into the earth below the frost line, lined with straw and covered with a heavy door weighted down against the wind, it kept potatoes, turnips, carrots, cabbage, dried beans, and salt meat from freezing solid through the winter months. A well-built root cellar was a family's entire grocery store for 5 months. Everything they had grown, harvested, dried, salted, and stored since July was down in that hole. But a hard enough freeze went deeper than anyone expected. The frost line on the northern plains could reach 4 or 5 feet in a brutal winter. Kansas and Nebraska homesteaders described opening their cellars in January to find everything ruined. Potatoes turned to gray mush, carrots black and soft, jars of preserves cracked by the ice inside them. Months of summer labor, months of canning and pickling and drying, all of it gone in a single cold snap that drove the frost deeper than the shovel had gone. When the cellar failed, there was nothing between that family and real hunger until the ground thawed in April. And April was a long way off. Number 18. The winter diet was not just miserable, it could kill you slowly. Salt pork, hardtack, dried corn, beans if the supply held out, molasses if they were lucky, no fresh vegetables from November to April, no greens, no citrus, no variation at all for 5 months running. That diet produced scurvy, which loosened teeth and opened sores that would not heal. It weakened bones, inflamed joints, and destroyed the body's ability to fight infection. Army post records from Fort Riley and Fort Kearny document the toll in detail. Many frontier families survived the cold only to be broken by what they had to eat to get through it. The food that kept them alive was taking them apart from the inside. Number 17. Sod houses were warmer than log cabins and full of creatures that would make your skin crawl. The thick earth walls of a prairie soddy, cut from the grassland in strips 2 feet wide, insulated far better than thin chinked logs. The earth held heat in a way timber never could. That was the advantage, and it was real. The price was dirt sifting from the ceiling onto the supper table with every gust of wind. Snakes that had nested in the sod walls during autumn, waking up in the warmth of midwinter and dropping onto the floor beside the bed. Mice tunneling through the walls all night long. Insects crawling out of the earth onto the bedding, the clothing, the food. When temperatures rose even slightly, moisture condensed on the inside walls and ran in muddy streaks onto everything below. The roof, made of the same sod laid across cottonwood poles, leaked with every thaw. Water dripped onto the beds, onto the stove, onto the table during meals. Women hung muslin under the ceiling to catch the worst of it. The muslin sagged and turned brown and had to be wrung out. Families in Kansas and Nebraska lived in these houses for years. Some raised entire families in them. They were not the quaint little houses the storybooks describe. They were dark, damp, vermin-filled shelters that happened to be warm enough to survive in, and that was enough. Number 16. They burned buffalo chips and twisted hay because there was nothing else to burn. On the treeless Great Plains, there was no wood to cut. There were no forests to clear. There was grass and sky and nothing in between. Families gathered dried buffalo dung by the wagon load each autumn and stacked it in cords beside the cabin the way an Eastern family would stack split oak. A dried buffalo chip burned slowly and gave reasonable heat, but it produced a sharp, bitter smoke that clung to everything in the cabin. When the great herds were slaughtered out in the 1870s and the chips grew scarce, families turned to prairie hay. Women and children twisted the dry grass into tight knots called cats, wringing them until the stems compressed enough to hold together in the fire. They fed these into the stove one at a time, every 3 or 4 minutes, around the clock. The hay burned fast and hot and gave almost no lasting warmth. The moment you stopped feeding it, the fire died. Someone had to stay awake all night, every night, twisting and feeding, twisting and feeding. Uriah Oblinger described this work in his letters from Fillmore County, Nebraska. The fire never waited. The cold never forgave a pause. And the smoke from those hay knots filled the cabin with a haze that burned the eyes and the throat and never cleared until spring. Number 15. A chimney fire could erase a family's entire world in minutes. Creosote, the black tar residue that builds up inside a poorly maintained chimney, catches fire when the temperature inside the flue climbs high enough. And on the frontier, chimneys were rarely cleaned properly. They were built from stacked stone, from sticks daubed with clay, from whatever a family could manage. When the creosote ignited, the chimney roared. Sparks shot onto the roof. In a log cabin, a chimney fire became a house fire before anyone could carry a bucket of water from across the room. On the open plains in January, losing the cabin meant losing everything at once, not just shelter. The food stores, the tools, the seed saved for spring planting, the clothing, the bedding, every single possession the family had carried 1,000 miles west. County records from Kansas and Nebraska document families found afterward, standing in the snow in their nightclothes, barefoot, the cabin a pile of smoking logs behind them. They did not die from the fire. They died from what came after it, exposed on the open prairie in winter, with nothing left at all. Number 14. Every drop of water had to be chopped or melted. Wells froze. Creeks froze solid to the bottom. Every cup of water for drinking, cooking, washing, and watering the stock had to be melted from snow on the stove or chopped from ice with an axe. A full bucket of packed snow melted down to only a few inches of water. The process was brutally slow, and it burned fuel with every minute on the fire. In a deep freeze, the family faced an impossible choice. Burn what little fuel they had to melt water, or burn it to keep the cabin warm. There was almost never enough for both. 13 entries down, 12 to go, and we have not yet touched the one that killed more families than any blizzard ever did. It is coming. Number 13. Chilblains and frostbite were constant companions from November to March. Chronically cold, damp hands and feet swelled, cracked, bled, and itched through the entire winter. Settlers called it winter itch, and it never fully healed until the ground thawed. Severe frostbite turned fingers and toes black. At Fort Kearny and Fort Laramie, Army surgeons documented case after case of frostbitten soldiers and civilians. There was no treatment worth the name. When gangrene set in, the limb came off at the nearest table with whatever tools were at hand. No anesthetic, no hospital, just a blade, a hot iron, and someone strong enough to hold the patient down. Number 12. Cabin fever was not a figure of speech. It was a documented medical reality that destroyed families from the inside. A husband, a wife, and their children sealed inside a single room 14 feet square for 4 or 5 months at a time. Unable to travel. Unable to see a neighbor. Sometimes unable to push the cabin door open against snow, drifted 5 or 6 feet high against the wall. The same faces, the same walls, the same dim light, the same smell, day after day after day. The isolation produced depression first, then paranoia, then hallucinations, then sudden outbursts of violence that left the family shattered. Women suffered disproportionately. A husband could at least go to the barn, tend the stock, chop ice. A woman with small children often spent the entire winter inside that room without seeing another adult face outside her own family from November until April. County asylum committal records from Dakota Territory and Minnesota in the 1870s and 80s tell this story in numbers that are hard to look at. The plains broke bodies all winter long. They also broke minds, and the broken minds did not always come back when the snow melted. Number 11. Children as young as 6 were sent out to gather fuel in temperatures that could kill a grown man. When the buffalo chip pile ran low or the twisted hay supply dwindled, the youngest members of the family were sent out with burlap sacks to scavenge whatever would burn. Cow dung, corn cobs, dried weeds, anything. They worked barehanded in wind that cut through every layer they wore. Some of them did not come home. On the plains, fuel gathering was considered children's work. That single fact tells you more about what frontier childhood actually meant than any textbook ever written. Number 10. The School Children's Blizzard, January 12, 1888. The morning broke warm across Nebraska, Dakota Territory, and Minnesota. After weeks of bitter cold, the temperature climbed above freezing before noon. It felt like a gift. Teachers opened the schoolhouse windows. Parents sent their children to school without heavy coats. Some students started home early to enjoy the mild afternoon. Then, around 3 in the afternoon, the western sky turned a shade of dark that people later said looked like a moving wall. Within minutes, the temperature dropped 40 degrees. The wind came in at 60 miles an hour, driving snow so thick and so fine that a person could not see their own outstretched hand. 235 people died in a matter of hours. Most of them were children, caught in the open, caught between the schoolhouse and home, caught on flat ground with no landmarks and no shelter. Etta Shattuck, a young teacher in rural Nebraska, tied her students together with twine, linked herself to the front of the line, and walked them through the whiteout to a farmhouse she found by stumbling into the fence. She saved every one of them. The Westphalian children in Dakota Territory were not as fortunate. They froze to death within sight of their own front door. They could not see it. Nobody could see anything at all. Number 9. People froze to death inside their own homes. Not in the open, not on the trail, not lost in a blizzard. Inside their own cabin, in their own bed, under their own quilts, with the stove standing 3 feet away. When the fuel ran out during the night, or the fire simply died because no one was strong enough to get up and feed it, the cabin temperature dropped below freezing within the hour. The walls were not insulated. The wind found every crack. Families were found by neighbors days or sometimes weeks later, frozen in their beds, the children placed between the parents for warmth that never came, the stove cold and the ash box empty. County death records from Nebraska and Dakota in the 1870s and 80s list these cases as routine entries. Found frozen in dwelling. No further comment. They were not remarkable events. They were expected. They happened every single winter in every county on the plains. Number 8. When frostbite turned to gangrene, there was no hospital to go to. The nearest doctor might be 80 or 100 miles away over impassable roads. Families performed the amputation themselves at the kitchen table. A carpenter's saw, a piece of leather to bite, whiskey poured on the wound if any was available, a hot iron pressed against the stump to stop the bleeding. The survival odds were grim. Infection took the ones the cold had started. Army post-hospital records from Fort Laramie and Fort Robinson describe the details of frontier amputation with a plainness that makes the stomach turn. Number 7. Babies died at catastrophic rates every winter. Infant mortality on the frontier already ran as high as 1 in 4 during the best seasons. In winter, the numbers climbed sharply. Babies froze in cradles placed too far from the stove. Babies died of respiratory infections from breathing smoke in sealed cabins night after night. Babies died because their mothers, weakened by months of salt pork and dried corn, could no longer produce enough milk to feed them. County burial registers from the Plain States show the pattern year after year. Tiny graves with winter dates clustered together, half-sized headstones, row after row. The smallest stones in the churchyard, the ones nobody talks about anymore. Number 6. The cast iron stove changed everything, but most families could not get one. An enclosed cast iron stove radiated heat in every direction, burned fuel 3 or 4 times more efficiently than an open fireplace, and could hold a fire through the entire night without feeding. It was the single greatest advance in frontier winter survival. But a good one cost $10 to $20 when a month of hard wages might be $12. The Sears Roebuck catalog listed them, and homesteaders circled the page and waited. Probate inventories show the stove listed as the most valuable object in the cabin, worth more than the furniture, more than the tools, more than the rifle. The families who owned a stove survived. The families still saving for one gambled with their lives every single night until it arrived. 6 entries left. The answer to the question I asked at the start is almost here. It is not the blizzard. It is not the cold. It is something the movies never once showed you. Number 5. Livestock died by the tens of thousands, and the families who depended on them followed right behind. The winter of 1886 to 87 is still called the Great Die-Up. It began with heavy snow in November and never let up. Temperatures across Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas stayed below zero for weeks at a time. An estimated 60 to 90% of all cattle on the northern plains froze in the fields or starved where they stood. Granville Stuart, one of Montana's biggest cattlemen, rode out after the spring thaw to survey his range. He found cattle frozen, standing upright in the coulees and draws, their eyes still open, coated in ice, dead on their feet. The open-range cattle industry never recovered. It was finished in a single season, but the ranchers at least had other assets. The homesteader who depended on a single milk cow or one team of oxen had nothing else. When those animals died, there was no milk for the children, no butter, no cream. There was no draft power to break the ground in spring. There was no way to haul the firewood that might keep the family alive through the next winter. The cow was the family's entire margin of survival. When she went down in the snow, so did they. Number 4. When the woodcutter died, the family died with him. A husband caught in a whiteout walking back from the timber stand with a sled of split logs. A father killed by a falling cottonwood while cutting firewood in frozen ground that would not hold the roots. A broken leg on the ice 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, with no one to hear the shout. On the frontier, winter survival depended entirely on the one able-bodied adult who could swing an axe, haul water from the frozen creek, feed the livestock in the dark, and get up 3 times in the night to feed the fire. When that person was gone, the chain broke. A woman with 3 small children could not cut, split, and haul enough firewood to keep a cabin warm through a plains winter. She simply could not do it. The math did not work. Neighbors were too far away to know anything was wrong until the snow melted. Women and children were found in spring, frozen in their beds, the woodpile empty, the stove cold, the cabin door still barred from the inside. The county clerk wrote the names in the register and moved on to the next page. Number 3. On the treeless plains, fuel was the real emergency, not the temperature. The Great Plains from central Kansas north to the Dakotas had almost no standing timber. Government surveyors noted it in their reports. Railroad land agents buried those reports and printed advertisements showing forests that did not exist. Families arrived expecting woodland and found grass to the horizon in every direction. Every stick of firewood had to be hauled by wagon from river bottoms, sometimes 40 or 50 miles away. When the money ran out, when the wagon broke, when the snow closed the trail, there was nothing to burn. Families burned their furniture, they burned their fence posts. They tore boards from the walls of their own cabin and fed them into the stove, dismantling their shelter from the inside to keep the fire alive for one more night. The temperature was never the enemy. The absence of anything to burn was. Hollywood never filmed this scene because there is nothing cinematic about a woman prying a board from her own wall with frozen hands. But it happened across the plains every winter for decades. Number 2. The long winter, 1880 to 1881, October to April. Blizzard after blizzard after blizzard swept across Dakota Territory without pause. The railroad tracks were buried under drifts 15 feet deep. No supply trains reached the interior towns for months. The town of De Smet in Dakota Territory came within days of mass starvation. Laura Ingalls Wilder was 13 years old. She lived through it and wrote about it with a clarity that still cuts. Almanzo Wilder and a man named Cap Garland made a desperate ride south across open prairie between storms to find a settler rumored to have stored seed wheat. They found him. They hauled 60 bushels of wheat back through snowdrifts that buried the horses to the chest. The town ground it by hand in coffee mills, a handful at a time, to bake the bread that kept them alive. That wheat saved De Smet. The long winter is the most documented, most specific, most brutally detailed season in all of frontier history. And the audience at home right now is certain this is the answer. The great blizzard, the endless winter, the famous storm, it is not. Number 1. The smoke. Here is the answer to the question I asked you at the very start. The deadliest truth about frontier winter was not the cold, it was the fire. Every single winter, families sealed their cabins as tight as they could against the wind and then burned whatever desperate fuel they had managed to gather. Green wood that would not catch and smoldered for hours. Buffalo chips that filled the room with thick, acrid, eye-burning haze. Twisted prairie hay that flared and choked and had to be fed every few minutes. Corn cobs that smoked far more than they ever burned. Every crack was sealed because ventilation meant heat loss, and so the smoke stayed inside. Carbon monoxide built up invisibly against the ceiling and settled down over sleeping families in the coldest hours before dawn. Chronic smoke exposure inflamed the lungs, scarred the airways, and opened the door to bacterial infection that a healthy body could have fought off. Respiratory illness, what the county records called winter cough or lung fever or congestion of the lungs, killed slowly and steadily from November to March. The infants went first, then the elderly, then the weakened, the malnourished, the ones whose lungs had been filling with smoke for 4 straight months. It was not dramatic. There was no single terrible day. It was slow, quiet, and so ordinary that families accepted it the way they accepted the wind. County death registries from Nebraska, Kansas, and Dakota Territory list respiratory illness as the leading recorded cause of winter death year after year after year, far ahead of freezing, far ahead of exposure, far ahead of blizzards. The fire that kept them alive was poisoning them the entire time. So who built the legend that buried this truth? 3 hands shaped it, and none of them were innocent. First, the railroad companies, the Union Pacific, the Burlington, the Northern Pacific. They printed pamphlets in 6 languages and distributed them across Europe and the eastern states, advertising mild winters, abundant timber, and rich soil on land that had none of those things. They knew. Their own surveyors had reported the treeless plains, the killing winters, the drought cycles. They printed the pamphlets anyway because every family that filed a homestead claim bought a ticket on their train and settled along their track. Second, the federal government. The General Land Office agents who staffed the territory offices told arriving families what they needed to hear to keep the claims coming. Gentle seasons, good water, plenty of fuel. They were filling the territories to justify the railroad subsidies that Congress had already approved. The settlers were the product, not the customer. And third, Hollywood. 100 years of westerns put a roaring fireplace in every frontier cabin with clean golden light, a warm glow on the children's faces, and not a wisp of smoke in the room. Not once did a camera show the choking haze, the sealed windows, the mother coughing blood into a rag, the infant who went silent in the cradle. The frontier hearth you picture in your mind was designed on a soundstage in Burbank. The real fire was nothing like it. So here is my honest answer to the question I planted at the very start of this video. The deadliest truth on this list was not the blizzard. It was not the long winter. It was not the cold at all. It was number 1, the smoke, the fire itself. The very thing they built every night to save their lives was the thing that was taking those lives away, week by week, breath by breath, all winter long. We remembered the blizzards because they were dramatic and sudden, and they made the newspapers. We remembered the long winter because Laura Ingalls Wilder survived it and wrote it down with a clarity that still hits like a fist. We forgot the smoke because it was quiet, because it was ordinary, because it killed people who never made it into anyone's book or anyone's movie. Tonight, somewhere, a thermostat will click and warm air will move through a house without anyone giving it a thought. 140 years ago, a woman on the Nebraska plains stayed awake all night twisting hay into knots to keep her children breathing until sunrise. The smoke from that fire was already in her lungs, and in theirs. We remembered the storms, we forgot the smoke, and we forgot her. Which one of these would have broken you? Tell me below. And if you want the truth behind another piece of frontier life the movies got wrong, the next one is waiting for you right now.